And if you're checking your schedules, that is, I think we're 5 minutes later than what we were originally scheduled for, which means we go until, somebody help me out here, we go until probably noon. It's at 11:55, so there we go. You can keep me on track, and we're going to start with session number 2. This is in the, it's called the warfare. We're looking at mission, and then outreach will be the next one here. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and this is titled The Great Commission Checkup. And there's some of the things we're going to talk about here that flow a little bit. How many were in the last session that was spiritual warfare? Yeah, so I'm going to reference that a little bit. Yeah, were you there, Bill? Oh, yeah, okay. So what we're looking at here is the task remaining, or the state of the gospel. So we're going to look at some things about that. A bit about myself. My wife and I, 36 years ago, boarded a plane to the Andes Mountains of Venezuela, and that started a journey. We just want to make Jesus famous wherever we find ourselves. That's still our passion today. My wife is, next session, she's downstairs leading a session on children's ministry. But that started 36 years ago. Praise God. We've been faithful and involved in a number of things. We, right after we got married, we served in Venezuela for 12 years. It was MK education and church planting support. And for the past 25 years, we've been mobilizing the North American church to impact the nations for the past 25 years. So, impacting the nations, what does that mean? We're going to unpack that and practically have you ask questions. What does that mean for me and my church today? I serve with an organization called Bethany International. I'm going to back up. Part of the 25 years, there were 18 years spent here in Bemidji. We were on staff at Oak Hills, and then short-term, we had a northern branch office for short-term evangelical missions, and we led teams to China, Turkey, Bangladesh, and other places, and these were restricted access places. And that was all about taking the church where it's not, and that was impacting the nations. I love the church. My dad was a pastor at Bagley, Grace Chapel in Bagley, and while he was pastoring there, he was a volunteer pastor to the pastors for Oak Hills Fellowship. So this is what he was all about, his heartbeat. Serve with Bethany International. Our displays right here, your door to the unreached world. Part of that is Bethany Global University. We do one thing, train students for your degree to go to the unreached people groups, how to do that. So come see us at the table if you want to learn more. My wife Kathy serves with an immigrant ministry. She's works with education and leadership development. That's our family, our adult kids. All of them went to Bemidji High School and grew up here, and they live in the Twin Cities. So I'm going to talk right now about 3 things you probably don't know about me, okay? You probably don't know that in 2013, my wife and I led a team to, did some prayer walking on the Great Wall, but we were able to go down into Tibet. And we talk about prayer walking, that ties in with what the last session on spiritual warfare. The whole reason we do that, you know, in 2 Corinthians 4:4, it says the God of this world, the small g, the God of this world, has blinded their eyes, so they can't see the light of the gospel. And so being on site, with insight, and praying for pushing back the spiritual warfare, pushing back the darkness and the blindness. And so we're talking about, Lord, break through that stronghold. And so that's a lot of what the prayer walking teams are about. So the first thing about me you probably didn't know is I led that team to China and Tibet with my wife. Second thing you probably didn't know about me is just before we left Venezuela, took my son Mark, he's 34 now, but he went with me to the Yanomamo Indians in the jungles, the Amazons there in Venezuela, some of our kids. But you can see he has a Green Bay Packer jersey, there's a Milwaukee Brewers hat, he's holding that little tiger skin, he's still got that today. The third thing you probably didn't know about me is I had a really sweet mustache just before we got married. So that's, and you probably didn't know that I'm a big picture kind of person. So what we're going to do right now is, for me, that makes it easy. I need things big picture and simple. And I think sometimes we can complicate things too much. So right now, we're going to take the big picture of what does God ask the church to do. Okay? So we're going to be looking at that. You ever heard that phrase, sometimes it's so close, we don't see the forest because the trees get in the way? Heard that phrase, you know, something's just too close, now I can't meet the big picture. So what do we see here? Ooh, got someone in the back row. He's got it.
Wow.
Look at that. He's old school. Right. You know what a cassette tape is? You ever seen it? Okay. Good. How about this one? All right. Yeah. See, you get too close, you just can't see it. So we're gonna back up with the big picture. One more. Anybody? It's that nose piece back. So there's one more. Now, don't say this because at the very end of the presentation we'll give you the answer. But there's one more to look at, and we'll look at that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a great overview, but it's the big picture of the Great Commission. We're going to look at an overview, look at some trends, and then some challenges, all having to do with the Great Commission for us today in the local church. Okay. So what is the Great Commission? There are other references, there's also a Mark in different places, but this is the one that we often look to. Matthew 28:19, we all have it memorized. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. So that's the Great Commission. And the big question today is, and it's been over 2,000 years since Jesus gave that command, right? So, is everyone reached? Are all nations? What's up with that? So we're going to look at that, why, and find out where we can help to be effective. But what do they mean by make disciples of all nations? Not all countries? How many countries do we have politically? I'm just going to give you the answer here. By this, what Jesus meant by a nation, he's referring to people groups. The word is really every ethnic. So go and make disciples, not of all the countries, but make disciples of every ethnic, all the people groups. Now you go to the end, you see that wonderful praise passage in Revelation 5:9, Revelation 7:9. And I saw before the throne a crowd of witnesses from everyone, every tribe, every tongue, every nation, every ethnic, every people group was there. So when Jesus gave this command, he was saying, go and make disciples of all the people groups, every tribe. And you know about tribes, don't you, brother? Every tongue, every nation. Yeah. So it helps us to compare. How do countries compare? This really helps me. Just think of this country of Nigeria. Just one country, okay? But imagine this now. It's hard for us to grasp it, but in Nigeria, there are 538 different nations within one country. Just kind of grasp that. So when we talk about countries versus nations, okay, that's a little different picture. That's what Jesus was talking about, the 538 nations, not just go make disciples of Nigeria, okay? We like pancakes or waffles? What do you like better? Both, okay. Well, the world is more like what? It's really more like a waffle. Because you might be able to see it at the bottom of it. Just like syrup on a waffle, it can go only until here. You put that syrup on, it's just going to keep running all the way off the edge. But on that waffle, it's there and it stops when it hits the end. So the gospel can only naturally flow until it hits the barriers, the cultural barriers of the ethnic and cultural group. So that just helped us a little bit, but then we have to come up with two questions. If Jesus gave the command, go to all ethnic, every people group, well, who are they? That's one question. And then the other one, which ones, once we identify who they are, have few, if any, disciples? Because if we know of a place that has 0 disciples, 0 followers of Christ, another place that has a high percentage, 75%, where would we want to go? So it just helps us, right? Two questions. Who are they? And which ones have few disciples? So, anybody have an idea of the current estimate of ethnic people groups? Total. Okay, we're just going to give it a quick. So 16,000, usually say 16,500. That number can go up as they identify more people. You say, come on, is that still happening? Every once in a while, yeah, wow, there's another linguistic, certain type of people group we didn't identify. But just keep in your mind, 16,000, and of the 16,000, how many would we consider are unreached? And you might say, okay, John, what do you mean by unreached? For this presentation, our discussion today, we're looking at unreached means there's 2% or less followers of Jesus Christ in that country. Okay? There's less than 2%, that people group is unreached. And many people groups are, go to the next level, another term called unengaged. They don't even have one person present. It's not on anyone's radar. They are there. No one's reaching them. There's no one there. So, current estimate, how many of the 16,000 are unreached? And that's going to be, it's 40% of all the people groups, but it's 6,664, and that's going to change. Actually, that number is going down. And that's good news, right? Because if it's going down, that means, wow, we've sent out more people. More people are reaching, they're engaging that particular group, so the number's going down. So that's a good thing. I remember that was 6,900 actually. So here's just an example. In India, there's just one people group, the Lodha, they're Hindu, they're unreached, 6.7 million. That's just one of these 6,600, right? So in Afghanistan, 2.8 million is Hazara people. They're mostly unreached. That's just 2 out of the 6,600. So it just gives you a big picture, right? So you're just kind of backing up and saying, okay, what do we do? So we know who they are, and we know how many there are, and now we have to ask where, right? So how many have heard of that term, the 1040 window? Okay, it has nothing to do with your tax form, 1040 tax form. Where does that come from, 1040? Okay, from the map. Okay, yep, there you go. 10 degrees north latitude and 40 degrees north latitude, okay? And so between that, we have what we call the 1040, it's a window. You can see there are some outside, you can see down here in Indonesia, Malaysia, that area, but the majority of the unreached people groups are in that region. So the last 15, almost 20 years, Ralph Winter, he started this actually in 1976, talking about unreached people groups, but the 1040 window. So there's been a huge movement. So that's our target. Would we want to be going where they have established and significant churches? Are there still lost people in those green areas? Sure. Do we still need to have churches there, you know? But if we're going to complete the task that's remaining, we need to identify where the unreached, and then we need to do something about it. So that's what we're looking at. Here's just some examples of countries with the most unreached people groups. India, China, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, the top 5. And notice what I mentioned there. These are from Joshua Project. I have a good resource thing at the end, and there are a number of other places. But this presentation and many other resources about current things going on with unreached people groups, great resources for your church are right there. Just go to Joshua Project. It's .net. We just get a lot of resources. So let's look at the next one. How many people are on the planet today? Yeah, between 6 and 7 billion. Actually, it's 7.4 billion. And I remember the day when it came up in the news. It was crazy. I don't know, I was watching it today. But on October 31st in 2011, that's what, 7 years ago? That's when they hit 7 billion. And I remember they were showing a baby from the first baby born, the billionth baby in China. Then they went to the time zones and showed pictures and saying, this is it. We've hit that 7 billion mark. But look, that was only, what, 6 years ago? 7.4 is probably 7.5. If you're really interested in this, you can just Google time clock, population time clock, and it'll just keep rolling. And you can just see the population going. Now these are people that Jesus Christ died for, right? And they're waiting to hear the good news. So the question is, why do the nations wait? That's what we're looking at. This helps a little bit. This was an older chart. Notice they said 7.3 billion, but it's still very close. It helps us understand. Again, big picture, simple pie chart, right? So you look at the light green, about 10% of that 7.4, 7.5 billion are true followers of Jesus Christ. They know the gospel. They have Christ in their heart. They understand the truths and the terms of the cross. 10%. There are another 22% who are nominal adherents. On a job application or a college application, you know, what's your religion? Oh, I'm Christian. C&E, go to church at Christmas and Easter, and, you know, and but they would identify with Christianity, but do they have Christ in their hearts? Are they a true follower? So there's another 22%. But then you look at, there's almost 40% that they have heard, they have access to the gospel. There are Christian radio stations, Bible bookstores, TVs, there are churches almost on every corner. If they want to hear the gospel, they have access to it. So 40% have access, and we're going to say they've heard, possibly. I'm going to say they've heard, but they have rejected or not responded. So 40%, they have access. But then, look at this, 30%, 30%, virtually no exposure or access. So that's really, we're honing in on, okay, Jesus said, take the gospel to every unreached people, every nation. 30% of our world. So now we know, wow, that's what we're looking at. A couple other stats that are helpful. Just to grasp, I hate to do stats, but, statistics. 86% of all Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus have never met a follower of Jesus. Never met a follower of Jesus. And you know what it says, and actually I can read it at the bottom of International Messengers, they've got it at the bottom there, Romans 10:15, how beautiful are the feet, but go a few verses earlier, those that call upon the name of the Lord shall be, then Paul acceptable. Oh, how can they be saved if they haven't heard? How can they hear if no one preaches them? How can they preach unless someone sends them? And that's what you guys do. You're the church. You're the senders who send them out. Okay? And Paul said, well, 86% have no access. They no follow Jesus. No one's being sent. No one's preaching. There are wonderful stories of people in the Middle East, Turkey, places having dreams and visions. And yet, what does this mean? They see Jesus in a vision. Who's going to explain it to us? So that's just one thing's helpful. So that was just an overview. Now we're going to look at some exciting stuff, some trends, global mission trends. We're going to look at the remarkable growth, great shift, translation, changing missionary force, wind and Muslim Islam. So let's do that quickly. This is really exciting. Okay, I know it's sad stuff when you read the news, but is Islam growing faster than Christianity?
I say disagree. The news media says disagree.
Anybody else? Got two choices. Hey, we're thinking about this because of course they're growing fast. That's all we hear about, right? So you look at the major religions' annual growth, and this was done probably 3 years ago. Annual growth. But you know what the key is? The bill's on. Major religions. You remember that pie chart? That 22% of the nominal, like, oh yeah, I'm Christian. Do they have the true followers of Christ? So let's talk about evangelical Christianity. And you look at that. So Islam is growing in major religions, but if you look at evangelical Christianity, there it is. Christianity just in general. So is the Holy Spirit on the move? Can we say amen? Yes. And so if you hear this in the news, people say everywhere we look, Islam is just taking over. Folks, God is on the move, a greater percentage of evangelical Christianity. So we can be excited about that, and let's find out where God's moving, where He needs, and let's jump on board. Go ahead, Bill.
We were in Cambodia, we were in Cambodia in 2001, we were there in 2011. Number one religion, of course, is Buddhism. Number two was Islam in 2001. Number three, Christianity, evangelical Christianity. Islam is now number three in Cambodia. Evangelical Christianity.
In how many years?
17.
Yeah, but over the 17-year span. So there he saw exactly what we're talking about here. So, I say two things. Don't be discouraged and don't believe that, but you can be mobilizers and help others understand the truth. So let's just jump in. Let's join in where God's working. Let's do that. So that's helpful to understand that. But you can't read it, but most of the growth, it's occurring in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. That's where the growth is. It's not happening in Europe, North America. So now we know what's going on in the world. This is so exciting. Just think about China. Today they estimate 4.7 million are baptized every year. 12,000 become believers every day. Chinese officials say 130 million Christians. Chinese Christians. You ever heard of the Back to Jerusalem movement? Incredible vision. Remember in the book of Acts, Apostle Paul he wanted it to go east, but the Holy Spirit denied it. Said no. And then he said, go west. And there was the Macedonian call. You hear about that? But Paul wanted, he said, you know, but the Spirit forbade me, you know. Holy Spirit said, no, that's not it, Paul, you're speaking, listen. And he said he went to Macedonia. If he had gone east, it would have been into China. And so the Chinese have looked at that and they said, you know what? We think that's us. God's called us the Chinese church. And if you look in the map, if you remember with that 1040, when you go from China, you go back to Jerusalem, what you go right through the heart of the 1040 window. China's on the eastern side to go back to Jerusalem, complete that circle, globally taking the gospel. The Chinese said, that's us. We're going to do it. We're doing it. And it's just amazing. And they have a goal saying 50,000 missionaries cross-culturally through Central Asia, right back through the Middle East. Isn't that amazing? But think back in 1949. That's when Mao Zedong and communism took over. And all the missionaries, many were martyred, kicked out like you got one day. I mean, it was just, and every Christian, there was a lot of martyring going on. Christians killed, Christianity was illegal, and the doors were shut. And so it was closed. Most of the world had no idea what's going on in China. So of course, you know, if you don't have the missionaries there now, and it's illegal, and all the persecution and the killing of Christians, those numbers are going to go way down. There's less than 1 million. There probably only be, I don't know, 500,000 or way less. Okay, 1949. But in 2014, as soon as the doors opened up, people go in there and say, let's check in the church. What happened, right? What happened? And it just mushroomed. Without the missionaries, it mushroomed. Yes, the Holy Spirit was on the move. So that's a remarkable growth in China. So, yeah. How about Iran? Iran. Hear about that country? That's such an oppressive regime there. You know that the gospel is exploding. 79, there are only 500 followers. 2008, over 1 million. But it's the younger generation saying, we don't want Islam. We've seen what it's done. We reject it. And the gospel is moving mightily in Iran. Look at Southern Africa. If you go back, this is the southern sub-Saharan, the southern part of Africa. In 1900 is 3%. Today it's more than 50% evangelical Christian in many countries. 20,000 African believers every day. That's the whole continent of Africa. In Egypt, have you heard about that cave outside Cairo? It's just amazing. You've heard about it, yeah. I was presenting this in, I don't know where it was, down in Wilmer in some perspectives class, and I had brought a guy raised and said, I was there like 2 months before. He was on a trip, and he was in Egypt. He said, I went to that cave. He said, it's real, it's amazing. But inside that cave, thousands of believers, right? I say 10,000. They meet for worship weekly. But there have been a lot of attacks against the Coptic Christians and others in Egypt, and there's a lot of, you ever heard of spiritual warfare? There's a lot of that going on. And so, but that's exciting. That's in Egypt. In Turkey, 1/3 of all the new believers say they had a dream or a vision. So God's on the move. Remarkable growth. What about a great shift? This just helps us to put in perspective where we're going. But look at 1800. Let's go back a couple hundred years. The percentage of Christians in Europe and North America, that's those that said, yeah, Christianity is my religion. 99%. 100 years later, went down to 90, 79, 50, 2012, only about 25% of the people would claim, yeah, I'm part of Christianity. And many of those are the now, right? You can see, look what happened in Latin America. There were 1%, 10%, and now between those three nations, 75%. Can you see the shift? That's beautiful. And this is what God's doing. It's we need to embrace it, get on board, and join in and do that. So now they say there's many Christians in China as North America. There may be more. So it's a great shift. And these are the new faces of the body of Christ from Nigeria, Brazil, India, China. These are our brothers and sisters. This is what God is doing globally. We're going to talk about in our backyard as well later. Another thing, another shift, another trend that we want to talk about is translation. Because remember we talked in Romans 10, Paul mentioned how people hear unless they're preached to. You know, they talk about they need God's word for the church to grow. And what about the translation? So if we look at about 7,000 languages globally, but if we're going to translate, we have about 8% have a complete Bible, 26% need translation, 20% almost have a New Testament. So New Testament 20, 8% only have a complete Bible, and so about 26% need that. There's about 30% is translation, it's under the way, and it's just going. So when you pray for God to move, pray for Him to raise up linguistic people that are gifted with that, that have the training to understand a language, that they can sit down and talk about God's beautiful story, and how that person, how you fit in God's beautiful plan, the Creator God, how He did that. How can He do that in the heart language? We use mine, Norwegian or German, they're not going to get it. I'm going to talk about the heart or certain things, but Scripture is written from an Eastern culture, honor, shame perspective, so pray for that. Pray for young people or business people or people today to say, I'm willing to quit my job, I'm going to take some training, God's gifted me with languages, I'm going to help with, I'm good with computers, I can help with this or that. So translation is something we need. And also receivers to senders, the changing missionary force. So let's look at this from 1985 to 2010. That missionaries are out for more than 4 years. You can see that it's just been kind of stagnant. And so the sending force, but that was in the U.S. But remember we talked about the global South and the other countries. Just look at this. The Koreans, they are saying we're going into the 1040 window. The Chinese, we talked about the back to Jerusalem. Here's your picture. Here's Jerusalem right here. And here's China. And they're going right through Central Asia, the Middle East, the Chinese, Filipinos, from the country of India. There's great stories in all of these. So I have one team that I led doing some prayers right on the Central Asian border, northwest China, with an unreached people group called the Uyghurs. And we were there, and we were praying through this one region, and there's a spot that said, if you're going to pray, go to the center part of all of Asia, the geographical center. And I've got pictures of it. We went there, this huge monument, and all the countries of Asia all around, we prayed there. We went in, there's a military base on the hill. We're worried about security, police, and everything. And so we're just so careful that we told the taxi, the van, just leave here, we walked, and we were just going to quietly pray to get closer. Heard this music. We said, ooh, we know that song. And Christian songs, things going on. Guess who it was? Koreans. They had their guitar out there, hands up high, worshiping, and they're just praising God openly with military base right there. They didn't care. So we had a time of prayer with them, sang in English. They were in Korean language. Filipinos have quite a unique way to get in to Middle East. Many of them work as housemaids and clean homes, and that's their strategy for Christians to get in. Nigerians, but sending missionaries to the 1040 window Latin America. This is what God's doing, people. It's amazing and it's exciting. So, wind in the house of Islam. This is amazing. So, you're going to start, so David Garrison, I've mentioned, is a great book and a great resource. Wind in the house of Islam, okay? But he's going to talk about, so Islam began in 1622. And over the centuries, there have been great numbers of Christians that have been converted to Islam. But there have been very few movements of Muslims coming to Christ since Islam was founded in 622. Let's just look at it. What is a movement? If there are at least 1,000 people baptized, believers, or 100 new churches started over 20 years, 2 decades. So over a 20-year period, if you have 1,000 people baptized or 100 church starts, that's a movement. Let's just look what's happened. For the first, look at how many years there, not even one movement from Islam to Christ until 1800. Then from 1800 to 1980, another 200 years, there were 2 movements they've identified. Indonesia and Ethiopia. Right? From 1980 to 2000, 11 movements. Iran, Algeria, Bulgaria, Albania, West Africa, Bangladesh, Central Asia, 11 movements identified. Isn't that amazing? Get ready. Here we go. From 2000 to 2013. So that's 5 years ago. So there are going to be more added. 69 movements across the globe. And there's you can get information on the website, Wind in the House of Islam. Great book, all those. But is God on the move? You'd be excited about that. So that's what's happening. These are some trends in missions. Of course, with media, you've heard of the Jesus Film Project. the billions of viewers. My wife and I have been, I took a team to Haiti a while back, and we did this crazy thing with a projector in Haitian, but we're going to Turkey with refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Now this next May, we're going to Georgia on the border with Azerbaijan, and so 85% of the people in this community are Muslims, Azerbaijanis, Azeris. And we're bringing a backpack, a little projector. It's about the size of a cell phone and about that thick. Little projector, these speakers and a battery and a screen you fold out, hang up to trees or in a park anywhere, and it projects huge sound. You get it in any language. So we're going to get it in the Azeri language and show so many incredible stories. And it's all part of the Jesus Film Project. You need some great resources for VBS in English or Spanish or any language, go to the Jesus Film Project. There's a lot of internet ministries going on, a lot of things to do with cell phones, putting gospels and things in little microchips. So, all right, so here's the big question. We've been given that Great Commission over 2,000. Why? Why has the gospel not been completed in every language? So there's some challenges. So we're going to look at them. And we're going to look at 5. You might identify others. And so this is all reality. And some of it's that spiritual warfare we're talking about, right? That's one of them. Let's just identify a few. But what about persecution? Globally, 1 in 10 believers suffer persecution. 1 out of 10 globally. Persecution. These are some of the countries where the greatest religious extremism is persecuting believers. You can see the countries there. 8 of the top 10 countries with the greatest persecution are dominated by radical Islam. And the past few years have been even greater. So persecution is getting heavier. Half the followers of Christ followers in Iran have fled the country. Half the believers have just left. They fled for their lives. And I've met many of them. A good friend of mine is a Muslim background believer. He's a refugee in Turkey right now. I'd love to come to America. Wonderful young man, but his family fled persecution. Here's another one. So we have persecution is one. Then there's the challenge of access. Guess what? 4 of the 5 the remaining 6,600, they live in restricted access countries. These are the places where it's not easy to go. All the easy places have been taken. They're already taken. It was easy to get there. Go to Brazil or South America, those places, But sometimes, okay, so these are the hard places, access. The government says, no, it's illegal to preach the gospel. It is illegal to be a missionary here. And we're atheistic, and any believer will be put in prison or education camps. So, and I've already mentioned this, 86% of the world's Hindu Muslim, they don't even know a follower of Christ. Never mind. So the access, it's hard to get there. So there's this hope you say, well, then that means we can't go to those countries? No. The Holy Spirit's going to say, no, you go. And so we have to do something we call create.